My mother told me. My $5 million retreat now belonged to my brother, then gave me 72 hours to hand it over, but she didn't know who was waiting in my boardroom. Do you ever wonder what it feels like to have the people who are supposed to love you most try to steal your entire life's work? Because I do. I know exactly what it feels like when your own mother, standing on the property you built from nothing, casually tells you it all belongs to your brother now. Asterisk, it was a crisp Thursday morning, just after 8 a.m. The kind of morning where the fog still hung heavy over the apple orchard, and the lavender bushes along the gravel paths were glistening with dew. One of my groundskeepers was meticulously raking the driveway into perfect lines, and I had a packed day ahead, 3 high-end bridal consultations before noon. Then a massive corporate team from Boston arriving for a wellness retreat. And right there, at the ornate iron gates of Cedar Hollow Retreat, my sanctuary, my business, stood my mother. She was looking at the place I'd built from absolute ruins, the business that had broken my back, cracked my skin with frostbite, and drained my bank accounts to zero. And she, in her pristine silk blouse and designer sunglasses, was telling me it belonged to my brother Julian. She said it with the same casual certainty you'd use to announce dinner was ready, completely expecting zero argument. I almost laughed. You never wanted this place, I reminded her. You called it a toxic money pit. She waved a dismissive hand. Don't be selfish, Elena. This is family property and Julian needs it. And in that moment, as the vibrant world I had painstakingly created woke up around me, something clicked. Something I should have understood 2 decades earlier. Some people don't actually want what you have. They just want to stop you from having it. This nightmare started about 3.5 years ago. My father, Robert, made family decisions like a military general playing chess, with absolute conviction that he was strategic and zero interest in whether his pawns agreed. He wasn't intentionally cruel. He genuinely thought he was doing right by his family. The problem was, his definition of family, always quietly, systematically excluded me. He has 2 children, Julian, 35, all charisma and blinding smiles, the kind of guy who makes you forget what you were saying when he walks in. Then there's me, Elena. I was 32, the quiet one. The one who spent hours reading blueprints, who wore muddy steel-toed boots, and who'd enthusiastically talk about structural load-bearing walls at fancy dinner parties while everyone politely ignored me. I was an architect, grinding 60-hour weeks at a competitive firm, good at my job, but never particularly noticed. Julian, by stark contrast, was in high-stakes wealth management, tailored suits, leased porches, and an uncanny ability to make everything look effortless. 3 years ago, my grandfather passed, leaving his 25-acre farm. The property went to my father, who in his infinite spreadsheet-driven wisdom decided it was time to redistribute generational wealth. He called a mandatory family dinner. Legal documents were already in manila folders next to our plates. Julian received a sprawling, luxury 2-bedroom penthouse in Boston's Back Bay, a $1.6 million turnkey life handed over on a silver platter. I received the farmhouse in the Berkshires. To be generous, it was an unmitigated disaster. The roof leaked like a sieve. Plumbing hadn't been updated since '74, and pipes burst every winter. The front porch had completely collapsed, looking like a shattered jaw. The massive main barn's roof had caved in 5 years prior. The 15-acre orchard was choked with invasive vines. Its irrigation system rusted into uselessness. The house reeked of black mold, rotting timber, and whatever feral raccoons had made it home. My mother, sipping her wine, called the split highly practical. My dad called it fair. His Excel spreadsheet proved it. Mathematically, it almost evened out on paper, but the heart of the matter was entirely different. Julian took one look at the Zillow listing of the ruined farmhouse, smirked, and said, "Perfect for you, Elena." What he really meant was quiet, small, forgotten, broken, not worth competing for. The unspoken message, understood by everyone at that mahogany table, was that Julian needed the better thing. He had the high society lifestyle that required a $1.6 million penthouse. I was just the workhorse, the one who could make do with scraps. I didn't argue, I didn't scream. I just folded my hands and said, "Thank you." But in my head, I'd already started doing a very different kind of math. What happened next wasn't a quick movie montage with inspirational indie music. It was 3 solid years of the most extraordinarily unglamorous, agonizing, bone-breaking work imaginable. The very first weekend after the deed cleared, I walked every inch of those 25 acres with a legal pad, a heavy-duty flashlight, and a commercial moisture meter I'd secretly borrowed from my firm. I made endless, terrifying lists: structural issues, plumbing failures, electrical hazards, a compromised roof. It took 14 hours just to assess the damage. Sitting on the collapsed porch steps with lukewarm coffee, I had 18 densely packed pages of notes. A proper renovation would cost 200 cal, 250 kai. I had 35 hours in savings. My supervisor, David, let me take on the farmhouse project in my off hours. He was gruff but brilliant, and partly he just thought the before and after photos would be incredible portfolio material. He gave me that encouragement with the specific naive enthusiasm of someone who'd never been freezing cold in a house without heat in January. Armed with my architectural drawings, I marched into the local credit union. Sarah Lynn, a sharp, no-nonsense loan officer, looked at my aggressively detailed business plan, my market research on New England wellness tourism, and my blueprints. "You're going to do the bulk of this physical labor yourself?" she asked. "With specialized contractors only where legally required," I said without blinking. "But yes, me." She approved a $160,000 line of credit. I won't lie, I drove home and immediately threw up from anxiety. It was terrifyingly real. People imagine home renovation through HGTV tinted glasses. This was not a fun journey of discovery. It was primarily hauling heavy, disgusting things. It was 4 days straight pulling up urine-soaked floorboards and carrying them on bruised shoulders to a massive steel dumpster. It was wearing a suffocating respirator for 9 hours, stripping mold-blackened drywall. It was the soul-crushing despair of learning at 11:30 p.m. that the wrong diameter PVC pipes meant the entire downstairs bathroom had to be violently ripped out. I slept on a deflating air mattress for 14 straight months, a plastic bucket above my head to catch roof leaks. I ate canned soup because the kitchen was gutted. My friends from the architecture firm visited twice in the first year. Both times they parked in the muddy driveway, looked at what was still a catastrophic mess, and offered polite, pitying words. Julian never visited. He was too busy posting photos from Boston rooftop bars. My parents visited once for 45 minutes in February of the first year. My mother shivered in her designer coat, said, "Well, at least it has good bones, I suppose," and then retreated to the heated car. My father stared at the exposed framing with polite distress. He commended my determination in the same tone you'd use to praise a child's ugly finger painting. They didn't offer a single dollar or an hour of labor. They offered a frozen lasagna, but what they gave me, entirely without meaning to, was the very thing they thought they were punishing me with: time, space, isolation. They gave me the intoxicating freedom that comes from being underestimated so completely that no one is watching your moves. By month 18, the heavy structural work was finally done. A new roof, modernized plumbing, updated electrical, a rebuilt porch. By month 22, the interiors were taking shape. I made aggressive, high-end design choices: wide plank reclaimed white oak floors, hand-plastered walls, massive floor-to-ceiling thermal windows framing the valley view. I designed a commercial-grade chef's kitchen with deep farmhouse sinks and a massive vintage cast-iron range I spent 3 weekends restoring. The collapsed barn was my biggest gamble. I'd planned to just demolish it, but one afternoon, standing inside the ruined frame, I visualized something else. I changed the blueprints. I rebuilt it as a luxury event space, using reinforced steel beams hidden behind salvaged timber. I installed a massive glass cupola, flooding the space with natural light. It now held 150 seated guests, with a state-of-the-art caterer's kitchen. I permitted it as a commercial event venue. The overgrown orchard took even longer. I hired a brilliant arborist. Miraculously, 13 of the 15 apple varieties were recoverable. The ancient weeping willow was breathtaking. I cleared, pruned, re-irrigated the entire orchard. I laid winding gravel paths, planted rows of French lavender, and built 4 massive wooden dining tables under the willow for our signature outdoor farm-to-table dinners. The old tractor shed became a stunning glass studio, radiant heated stone floors, an instant hit for photographers, yogis, corporate retreats. I named it Cedar Hollow Retreat. When I launched the professional website in month 31, I had a waiting list within 6 weeks. Word of mouth exploded when a major regional travel magazine did a 6-page spread on us. By month 34, I had a staff of 16 full-time employees with benefits and 12 specialized contractors. I'd hosted 18 luxury weddings, 4 corporate retreats, and was booked solid for the next 2 years. Occupancy in my 12 luxury guest suites was an insane 78%. Sarah Lynn, my loan officer, called to tell me the credit union wanted to feature Cedar Hollow Retreat in their statewide commercial as their ultimate small business success story. That call happened exactly 1 week before my mother showed up unannounced. She arrived on a Wednesday morning. I hadn't invited her, not really. I'd made a polite standing offer at Christmas, fully assuming she'd never lower herself to visit. I was in the garden when I heard the distinct crunch of tires. She stepped out of her Mercedes, a crisp silk blouse, pearls. She stood at the entrance for a long, heavy, utterly silent moment. I watched her from a distance. I watched her eyes dart over the flawlessly restored farmhouse, the blooming courtyard, the massive event barn with its glass cupola catching the morning sun. I watched her read the heavy bronze plaque at the gate. Cedar Hollow Retreat, founder and sole owner, Elena Bennett. Private property, no one authorized access. I'd commissioned that sign 6 months earlier at my lawyer's strict suggestion. At the time, I thought he was paranoid. Watching my mother's face twist into something dark and complicated as she read it, I realized my lawyer was a genius. I walked over, wiping dirt from my hands. "Good morning, Mom." She turned. She didn't look at me like a proud mother. She looked at me the way someone looks at a complicated math problem they thought they'd already solved, only to realize the formula was wrong. "You've done a lot," she finally managed. 3 years' worth, a lot, I replied flatly. She demanded a tour. She walked through the entire property in near total silence, which should have been my first massive red flag. My mother is not a quiet woman. She has loud, aggressive opinions about everything. Her absolute silence was not awe, it was pure cold calculation. We eventually sat down for coffee in the restored chef's kitchen. She asked almost too casually about my gross revenue, about investors. I answered honestly. Why? Habit. Maybe. Or the pathetic residual reflex of a daughter who still stupidly believed information shared with a mother was safe. The conversation shifted so gradually, so smoothly, that I almost missed the knife sliding in. "Your father wants to revisit the estate arrangement," she said, taking a delicate sip of coffee. I froze. Slowly, I put my mug down. "What arrangement?" "The property distribution from your grandfather's passing," she said, waving her hand as if discussing furniture. "Given what you've developed here, Elena, it's not really an individual personal asset anymore. It's clearly a family business." "It is my business," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I built every square inch of it." "You built it on family land," she shot back instantly. "Land that was graciously given to you by your father." She looked at me with that specific, chilling expression, the one that means she's already made a decision. "Julian has been struggling severely," she continued. "The Boston real estate market isn't what it was. His firm downsized. He's drowning in HOA fees and bad investments. He could really benefit from taking over something stable like this." I heard the words, but my brain refused to process the sheer audacity. "You want me to just give Julian my multi-million-dollar business?" "Not give. Don't be dramatic," she scoffed. "A corporate restructuring. You'd still be heavily involved, of course. Your father is willing to pay the legal fees to formalize it. Julian would step in as the CEO and manage the property and the finances. And you would receive a very generous salary to continue handling the day-to-day operations. App and cleaning." The words settled in the warm kitchen like toxic sludge. "A salary for my own business. A business I finance with my own debt, designed with my own degrees, permitted, built, staffed, and made wildly profitable from a rotting pile of garbage that no one in my family had touched in over a decade. They wanted to steal my empire and make me the maid." "No," I said. Just one word, hard and final. She went cold. Not explosive, but precise and terrifying, like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. "You have exactly 72 hours, she said, standing and smoothing her silk blouse. 72 hours to discuss this with your father and come to a reasonable arrangement. If you refuse, we will be forced to pursue other options." "What other options?" I asked, my heart hammering. "The property transfer 3 years ago may have been made without full legal consideration of your father's long-term intentions. There are legal avenues we can take to reclaim family assets." I looked at her. For a very, very long moment. The daughter in me died right there in that kitchen. The CEO took over. You really should have brought your lawyer with you today, Mom, I said softly. Because I already have mine. She scoffed, turned on her heel, and left without finishing her coffee. The minute her car disappeared, I locked the doors, marched into my office, opened my laptop, and made 3 phone calls that would change the trajectory of my family forever. The first call was to Jessica Reed, my corporate attorney. Jessica is ruthless, brilliant, and her voice makes any room feel legally airtight. I told her everything, specifically emphasizing legal avenues to reclaim family assets. There was a brief, sharp pause. I could hear Jessica typing rapidly. The original transfer deed from 3 years ago, she said, her voice dripping with boredom. I'm looking at it right now. No conditions, no reversionary clauses, no family interest provisions, no stipulations of any kind. None at all. They have absolutely nothing, Elena. The transfer was legally flawless and 100% clean. It is your land. If they attempt any legal action whatsoever, we will immediately counter you for harassment, coercion, and frivolous litigation, and we will bury them in legal fees. But here's what I want. I want to be sitting in the room when they come back. Good, I said. The panic draining, replaced by pure adrenaline. They're bringing Julian tomorrow morning. Be here at 9 a.m. The second call was to Thomas, my general manager, whom I'd poached from a 5-star luxury hotel. I told him what was happening and what I needed, his physical presence and overwhelming documentation. I want the LLC formation documents, employee contracts, booking ledgers, payroll records, and vendor agreements printed, bound, and sitting on the boardroom table. Consider it done, Thomas said without missing a beat. Do you want me to alert security? Not yet, I said. Just keep the corporate retreat guests happy. I don't want this drama bleeding into the guest experience. The third call was to Sarah Lynn at the credit union. I needed her on absolute, unbreakable record. If anyone other than me, specifically my father or my brother, attempts to contact the bank to make changes to the business accounts, the loan structure, or the property deed, what happens? I asked. Sarah laughed, a dry, hardened sound. Elena, I've been in commercial lending for 25 years. I've seen entitled families try to steal a successful woman's business more times than I can count. I put a hard lock on your accounts the day you open them. We don't process a single modification without your physical presence, your government ID, and your written notarized authorization. It's impossible. Do you want me to come down there tomorrow and tell them that to their faces? Actually, I smiled. Yes. Can you be here at 9:30? I wouldn't miss it for the world, she said. By midnight, I was lying in my bed, staring up at the beautifully restored ceiling, the same ceiling my grandfather had stared at. I wasn't afraid. That surprised me. But then it made perfect sense. I had spent 3 grueling years fixing broken things, fighting contractors, fighting the weather, and building an empire out of dirt. My mother's pathetic ultimatum was just another pile of trash I needed to haul to the dumpster. They arrived at exactly 9:45 a.m. the next morning. Julian pulled up in a massive, gleaming white pickup truck he'd clearly never used for actual work. It was spotless, performatively rural, the kind of truck a wealthy city finance bro buys to signal rugged masculinity he hasn't earned. I watched through the security cameras as his eyes landed on my bronze plaque. I saw his jaw clench so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. My mother, who'd arrived earlier, got out of her Mercedes and walked to him. Together, they marched up the gravel path toward the main house, looking like they were preparing to accept a surrender. I walked out to meet them in the courtyard. The property looked spectacular. The glass cupola on the event barn glowed. A wealthy couple was quietly drinking mimosas on a private terrace. Julian stopped dead, his eyes swept over the massive, sprawling, perfectly manicured estate. He didn't say a single word for almost a full minute. In that heavy silence, I could practically hear the gears in his head violently recalibrating. "This is significantly bigger than I thought," he finally muttered, his voice tight. "You never asked," I replied, crossing my arms. "You dismissed it as a rotting farmhouse. Dad told us you did some basic renovations." Julian stammered, looking at the massive timber event barn. "It's a luxury commercial retreat," I corrected him, my voice projecting clearly across the courtyard. 12 luxury guest suites, a 150-person wedding venue, a thermal glass yoga studio, 3 distinct dining experiences, full corporate event facilities, a fully operational heritage orchard, and a staff of 16. Julian looked at the bronze plaque again, then back at me. His arrogant smirk was completely gone. "You've been building a massive commercial business this whole time? What exactly did you think I was doing out here in the dirt for 3 years, Julian? I asked coldly. He didn't have an answer. My mother quickly stepped in, sensing she was losing control. Elena, enough of this. Julian is here because your father wants this restructuring resolved quietly and as a family. If Dad wanted to steal my company, he should have had the spine to come look me in the eye himself, I snapped. Julian's expression shifted to pure discomfort. He had driven out here expecting to walk into a charming, slightly run-down little bed and breakfast. Something small and quaint he could easily slap his name on, hire a cheap manager for, and fold into his portfolio to save himself from bankruptcy. Instead, he was standing at the gates of an absolute fortress. A multi-million-dollar hospitality machine that was very clearly, legally, and aggressively mine. "Let's go inside," I said, gesturing. "There are some people you really need to meet." I led them into the executive boardroom. It was the exact same room that used to be the mold-infested, rotting dining room where I'd eaten canned soup off a hot plate while crying from exhaustion 2 years ago. Now, it featured a massive, custom-built, live-edge oak conference table, leather executive chairs, and framed write-ups from travel magazines. Right in the center of the wall, perfectly illuminated, was a large framed photograph. It was a picture of the farmhouse exactly as it had looked the day I inherited it. Collapsed porch, sagging roof, black rot, pure decay. 3 people were already sitting at the oak table when I led my mother and Julian into the room. Jessica Reed, my attorney, stood up first. She smoothed her tailored suit. "Good morning, I'm Jessica Reed. I am the senior corporate counsel representing Cedar Hollow Retreat LLC and Elena Bennett's personal attorney." Julian stopped walking. He looked at Jessica, then at me. The blood drained from his perfectly tanned face. "LLC?" he choked out. "Limited Liability Company," Jessica said, her voice dripping with dangerous, sugary sweetness, "registered legally and flawlessly with the state of Massachusetts exactly 34 months ago. Salon managing member and 100% equity owner, Elena Bennett. The deed to this 25-acre property was transferred to Elena unconditionally. There are absolutely 0 family interest provisions, 0 reversionary clauses, and 0 shared ownership language of any kind." My mother opened her mouth to argue, her face flushing red with rage. But Jessica didn't even let her take a breath. "Furthermore," Jessica continued, her voice dropping into a lethal, authoritative register, "any attempt by you, your husband, or your son to pressure, threaten, or force Elena into transferring equity or restructuring ownership constitutes legal coercion and extortion under state law. If you pursue this ridiculous arrangement any further, I will personally file a restraining order," followed immediately by a massive civil lawsuit for harassment. Thomas, my general manager, stood up next. He didn't smile. He just pushed a massive 4-inch thick leather binder across the table toward Julian. "Thomas Vance, general manager," he said sharply. "Inside that binder is our current operational structure, LLC formation, payroll documentation for 16 employees, vendor contracts, and our booking ledger. We currently have 42 high-end events contracted through the next 24 months. The business is valued in the multi-millions. You cannot simply take over management of a highly regulated hospitality corporation without triggering massive legal and tax liabilities, none of which you are qualified to handle." Finally, Sarah Lynn stood up from the end of the table. "Sarah Lynn, senior commercial lender, Berkshire Regional Credit Union," she said, crossing her arms. "I hold the commercial notes on this property, per our strict lending agreements. Any modifications to the business accounts, the deed, or the loan structure require Elena's exclusive, in-person, notarized authorization. If anyone in your family attempts to contact my bank again regarding these assets, I will have our fraud department flag you." The boardroom fell so quiet you could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Julian slowly sat down in one of the leather chairs. He didn't sit down like a wealthy CEO claiming his throne. He collapsed into it like a man his knees had just given out. My mother stood frozen, her hands trembling as she clutched her designer purse. She looked down at the pathetic little manila folder she had brought with her. The arrangement my father had drafted that would have made me a salaried maid in my own empire. She didn't even try to open it. You planned all of this?" My mother whispered, looking at me like I was a monster. She said the word "planned" with this bizarre, offended weight, as if a woman having the intelligence to protect herself was somehow a violent betrayal. "Yes, Mom," I said, leaning forward and placing both hands flat on the table. "That is exactly what you have to do when you build something incredibly valuable and you know you are surrounded by thieves." "We are your family," she shrieked, finally losing her composure. "I know," I replied, my voice dead calm, "which is the only reason I am letting you walk out of this room today instead of having you arrested for attempted extortion. Now get out of my building." Julian wasn't even looking at me. He was staring blankly at the framed before photograph on the wall, the broken house, the collapsed porch, the black mold. You really did all of that yourself?" he asked. His voice sounded completely different. The arrogant finance bro performance was completely gone. He sounded small. "With specialized contractors, where code required it, and a massive commercial loan that I spent 2 years aggressively paying back," I said. Julian stared at the photo for a long time. The silence stretched until it was almost unbearable. Then, very quietly, he said, "I wouldn't have." I looked at him, narrowing my eyes. "What?" "I wouldn't have done it," he repeated, his voice cracking slightly. "If Dad had given this ruin to me, I wouldn't have fixed it. I wouldn't have survived it. I would have just sold it for scrap value." I didn't say anything back. I didn't gloat. I didn't insult him. Because in that exact moment, that was the most honest, vulnerable, and pathetic thing my golden child brother had ever said to me in his entire life. I didn't want to ruin the sheer weight of his realization. They left less than 5 minutes later. My mother didn't say goodbye. She practically sprinted to her Mercedes, slammed the door, and sped down the driveway, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. Julian walked slowly to his pristine fake work truck, got in, and drove away without looking back. And then the drama was over, and it was just a regular Thursday morning again. The wealthy couple finished their mimosas. The groundskeeper finished raking the gravel. The distant rhythmic sound of the prep chef chopping vegetables echoed from the commercial kitchen. Jessica packed her briefcase, smiled at me, and said, "You got titanium bones, Elena, in the building and in yourself." That evening, as the sun set, my phone rang. It was my father. I answered on the third ring. I fully expected him to scream, to threaten, to demand obedience. But when he spoke, he sounded incredibly old. Not physically, but old in the way a man sounds when the rigid, arrogant worldview he's held his entire life has just violently collapsed around him. "I didn't know," he said softly. "I know you didn't," I replied. I thought you would just patch up the roof and live a quiet, small life out there, something manageable. I didn't think you had." He trailed off, unable to find the words for the empire I had built. "You thought Julian needed the better thing?" I said. It wasn't an accusation, it was just a cold, hard fact. The silence on the line stretched. "I thought I was being highly practical," he finally whispered. "You were," I said, "and so was I." He exhaled a long, shaky breath. "Your mother called me screaming about lawyers. I told her to drop it. I'm not angry at you, Elena. I want you to know that whatever she tried to do today, whatever I let her try to do, it stops now. It is your property. I am so sorry we made you feel like you were the lesser child." I looked out my office window at the massive weeping willow tree at the edge of the property, the tree my grandfather had planted nearly a century ago. "Dad," I said quietly, "I want you to come visit." "I will," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "If you'll still have me." "Come in the spring," I said. "The orchard is extraordinary in April." It's been exactly 1 year since the ambush in that boardroom. My father did visit in late April. He drove up completely alone. He didn't even tell my mother he was coming. He spent the entire day walking the property. He stood under the massive weeping willow tree for an hour. He sat in the restored glass cupola barn, ate a farm-to-table lunch prepared by my executive chef, and just stared at the massive timber beams in total silence. At one point, we walked to the edge of the orchard where the oldest, most gnarled apple trees grew, the ones the arborist said were barely recoverable, the ones I had spent 2 agonizing years personally nursing back to health. My father ran his hand over the rough bark of the oldest tree. "Your grandfather planted this one himself," he said softly. "I know," I said. "He would have loved what you did with this place," my father said, tears welling in his eyes. "I gave you the lesser thing, Elena. I am so sorry." "Yes, you did," I said, looking out over the multi-million-dollar estate. "But I'm grateful you did, because the lesser thing had space in it." Julian's Boston penthouse was already finished. It was beautiful. It was expensive. But it was done. This place was broken, and broken things have room for you to build something entirely new. He just nodded, finally seeing me for the first time in 32 years. As for the rest of them, my mother still keeps her distance. We see each other briefly at Thanksgiving, rigidly polite, like strangers at a bus stop. There's a version of a relationship there, but the mother-daughter bond is permanently dead. Julian's life took a massive hit. The Boston real estate market tanked, his firm restructured, and he was forced to sell the penthouse at a massive loss just to cover his debts. I heard through my dad that Julian packed up and moved to Austin, Texas to work a mid-level job in commercial real estate. My dad says Julian is much more humbled and steady now. I genuinely hope he is. Cedar Hollow Retreat is now an absolute juggernaut. I have 22 full-time employees. We've hosted over 300 luxury events. We produce our own organic apple preserves that sell out instantly in our boutique farm shop. A major documentary crew came out last fall and filmed a segment on us for a piece on female-led hospitality empires. The framed before photograph still hangs dead center in the executive boardroom. The ruined house, the collapsed porch, the black mold, the pure despair. Wealthy corporate guests ask me about it all the time when they rent the room. "Why do you keep that horrible picture up?" they ask, sipping their artisan coffee. "Isn't it depressing to look at?" I always give them the exact same smile. "It's not a before picture," I tell them. "It is a permanent reminder of who actually does the hard work in this world and who just shows up expecting to collect the check." Then I smile, hand them their room keys, and go back to running my empire. So, what do you all think? Have you ever had a moment where you realized the lesser thing was actually the greatest gift? Or, what's one thing you built from the ground up that someone else tried to claim? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories.